One of the things that we worry about a lot, and this is what Jesus clearly is getting into, is money, and that we really have this kind of back and forth with such things. Now, a lot of conversation in our culture these days about 401. We're all trying to get ready to retire, even, if we're, pushing 30. And how much money do you have to have? We all know this, I think. You'd better know this. That you need in your 401k if you're going to retire. How much money? You need to watch more television. $1 million, right? You know this, you just don't say it. That's what they say. You have to have $1 million, right? And so then at the same time they say, well, that the average person has 100,000 or something like that, and so you're supposed to worry about money, and how are you going to see this going? I met a person this past week, and it's interesting always what people will say to clergy, especially if it's early on in the conversation, and it's very telling as to what's going on in their life by what they choose to share with you. And so, of course, when she finds out I'm a clergy, she says, oh, well, I'm a certain kind of denomination. We're just going to say that she said Methodist. It wasn't what she said, actually. And if you say that to me, all of us clergy, we've heard stories before. And so if she actually went to a church, she would say, I go to this and such church. But if you say, I am a part of this denomination, then you probably don't go to church. And so I felt I had to follow up, and I go, well, which church do you go to? She goes, oh, I don't go to church. They're always talking about money. And internally I go, well, I've never heard that before. Why does the church always talk about money? Well, it's because Jesus does. We don't have much of a choice. Not if we're going to be faithful to following all of the kinds of verses. Supposedly there are over 2,000 verses in the Bible that talk about money. And Jesus will talk about money more than any earthly kind of thing. Why does he do this? Well, we really don't like to hear it. And that's what immediately it starts churning inside of us. There is resistance met with Jesus' comments like this. And that only is telling to show us that, well, there really is something to this. Because otherwise we wouldn't respond so much with a visceral kind of response. Because it isn't just like a normal sin, per se, where you go, sorry, God, I did this, please forgive me, and okay, and we move on. This, from Jesus' perspective, is like another God, in the sense that video that we watched personified worry. So it is that, particularly in the Bible, they personify wealth. And there are times when it won't get translated into English as wealth. They'll just leave it as mammon, and they will capitalize the M to show that sense of it being an entity and how Jesus sees it as a competing God. Not that the gods have the same amount of power. Nope, the God of the universe certainly has far more power than the God of wealth or any other little g god, and maybe in our day we might call that a demon. But those are the kinds of ways that are out there. All those voices that are out there, those voices like the one in the video that speaks negatively into your life. Like with the guy who calls and the response is, yeah, you really did look stupid in that presentation, because we bring that. We're concerned, we're scared that we look stupid, then somehow or another there's negative talk that confirms that for us. And if you noticed, what I really kind of liked, unfortunately, about it was at the end he said, yeah, talk to you tomorrow. Right? Because we'll keep on with this. We'll get back to it tomorrow. It won't end. So for Jesus, he says you're going to either love God and hate money, or love money and hate God. We choose. And what's really disconcerting about this, and why it does discourage me when people say all the church is ever doing is talking about money, well, It is because Jesus is talking about money, and it's because Jesus says this is an issue of eternity. This has salvation-level concerns. It isn't about just that one little stupid sin that you did again, and you say, oh, I'm sorry, Jesus, and you move on. This is about which God you follow. And that's a big thing. And we don't want to hear it. We think that somehow we can follow God and do whatever we want from a wealth perspective, and those should really go together. But they don't, according to Jesus. They are opposite extremes, and you can only do one. So which one is it going to be? That's what Jesus time and again is going to lay before people, and we don't want to hear that, and we will rail against it. So we worry about all sorts of things, not least which money. And again, in that video, what I appreciated, this was the second thing, this was the bottom line for me, saying the little tagline that worry is like praying for what you don't want. Worry is praying for that which you don't want. I think that's really profound, whoever these people are, and to whatever degree they have some spiritual sensitivity, clearly they do, but it's a profound theological statement. Because so many times when we talk about prayer, what's prayer? Well, yeah, I know I should pray more. God really wants me to pray. Okay, well, what is prayer? Well, prayer is when I fold my hands, I bow my head, and I close my eyes, and I say, God, I'm really sorry that I did that stupid thing. Please forgive me. Okay, now we move on. That was prayer. That's a real simplistic understanding of prayer, and it isn't in any way the fullness of prayer. Because what we really don't understand is that prayer is everything that I think, say, and do. Not the least of which my thoughts. Because that's really scary, Most of us are fairly careful with what we say and even what we do. And when we do stupid, we try to hide stupid. Okay. But the things that we think, sometimes we think serious, scary stuff. Thoughts that go through your head. I've talked many times through the years that one of the earliest parts of Scripture that drove me in the clergy direction was because I needed answers to was the verse in the Bible that says, you should pray constantly. And I go, how in the world can you pray constantly? I want to trust God, but folding my hands, closing my eyes, and bowing my head when I'm driving just doesn't seem to be a good idea. How can you pray constantly, every single moment of your life? And one day, it just sort of came to me. I go, oh. It really is understanding that we always are praying constantly. You can't not pray constantly, actually. Just the vast majority of the time, we don't realize we're praying. Everything we think, say, and do has implications, is a statement to the heavens. The Bible will talk about, like, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, to help us understand that there is an interweaving, that we tend to think, oh, we're just like boring little earth here, and someday we're going to be in that cool heaven, and that's when it's really going to be great. And that those are like two very separate entities, but there's a way that they are weaving together that is lost on us. And so we don't understand the power, the level of concern that comes along with, not the least of which, those things that we think. Because again, Jesus will try to help us understand that one day when he's talking about the Ten Commandments. And he goes, you people just really don't understand the Ten Commandments at all. Like the one about don't kill someone. That's just not only, don't go shoot somebody, but in fact, you break that commandment if you think an angry thought. Well, all of a sudden, we've got a bunch of serial killers. If we care what Jesus has to say. My thoughts are as real to Jesus as the things I do, it would seem. and the impact on the world and the universe and the heavens is all there. That really is lost on us. But Jesus says we need to pay attention. So, the bottom line is don't bring curses on yourself or others through the kinds of things that you think, say, and do. It's that negative talk that we hear internally, and heaven forbid that we share it with someone else, that we put it on them. The Old Testament talks a lot about blessings and curses. And the fascinating piece of it all is that it seems God is saying to us that there is the opportunity. We choose in every circumstance, no matter how good or bad it seems to be, we choose whether it will be for blessing or for curse. It's not up to God, it's up to us. And so when you're going through difficult times, how are you going to respond? When someone does something bad into your life, how are you going to respond? Even how are you going to think? When a person gets angry with the pastor and says, I'm going to pray for you, we usually aren't happy about that, because they probably aren't going to pray in a way that's helpful. Well, even down to your thoughts. When someone hurts you, how are you going to think about them? The Bible talks about praying for your enemies, bless those who persecute you. Well, that will also, not the least of which, include how you think about them. Because everything we think, say, and do will either result in blessing or curse, because it is a prayer. The spiritual forces respond and bring blessing and curse into the world. So, if you want blessing, it isn't as easy as just sort of some psychological babble of saying, oh, okay, I shouldn't say negative things, shouldn't do negative self-talk like, yeah, I did bad at that presentation, I shouldn't probably be doing this job, I don't have what it takes, whatever. It's not just that self-talk and say, okay, I can do this and whatever. It isn't that at all, unfortunately. Because according to Jesus, there's an intentionality that is involved. And that's where the worry comes in, that shows what's really going on with our heart. And he says, your heart is where your treasure is. And so all of a sudden you have to answer that question, well, what do I treasure? What is absolutely vital to me? Again, this is where there is a resistance that burns inside of us when we hear this kind of thing. We don't want to have to really evaluate that monthly bank statement and say, well, what does this say about where I put God's gifts in my hands, how I manage the resources that God put into my care, so that, I spent this amount of money here. Now, we can beat ourselves down, and it's not a call to do that, but it is to recognize that there are ways in which we are going to expend resources that will support wealth, and there are ways in which that our heart will seek to be in alignment with God, to serve others, to benefit others. Our last sermon series was about relationships and how the bottom line from a godly perspective is that mutual benefit that wants to bless the other person. Well, that's what's involved here. What does your heart say? Because it's easy to say, and that's one of the pet peeves that any veteran of my preaching knows about, that 97% of people in America say we believe in God. But all that really means is that we believe that God exists. And to that, I really don't care. Because that is not believing in God according to what Jesus and the rest of the Bible is talking about when it says what it means to believe. Believe means to trust. Believe means that this is where my heart is. my heart wants to follow God first and foremost and forever. And that, according to Jesus, the rest of the stuff is going to work itself out if that's where my heart is. And so I have to ask myself, where do my treasures and my heart show up? Well, how are we going to find a way forward? What does it mean? What's it look like to follow God and not wealth? Jesus starts out by saying, you need to recognize that God provides. God takes care of you. You know, look at the creation around you. The birds, God takes care of them. The plants, God takes care of them. And if he takes care of them, you're the epitome of his creation. You know, at the beginning of the Bible, it talks about God's creating all this kind of stuff, and he says all of that is good. God creates humans, and he says, well, that was very good. We are the climax of creation. So if he takes care of all those other things, doesn't it make sense that he's going to make sure he takes care of you? So in a sense, worrying, in that sense of obsessing, being consumed, is unbelief. Because it's saying to God, whatever this issue is, whatever I'm thinking might possibly happen, you know, this 1 in 1,000 chance, so heaven forbid, I'm just going to put a lot of energy into that I don't think you can come alongside of that. That I have to worry about that because somehow or another, your presence in my life is not going to be enough in case that happens. That's really what we say with worry. So be confident that God will provide. Doesn't mean it's going to be pleasant. That's not the point. God sees you through. God is there, and God will somehow or another keep you on the eternal path that leads to where you want to go. So God will provide. And from that we respond then by seeking his kingdom. And you ask those things. Is this a concern that has eternal implications? Does my 401 have eternal implications? Probably not. Does my relationship with people have eternal implications? Absolutely. Does, evidently, how I think about God and wealth have eternal implications? According to Jesus, it does. All right. So these are the matters for me to place emphasis on. Again, in a sense of a focus, not an obsession, but leaving all the other stuff aside. If it doesn't have eternal implications, just sort of say, well, we kind of leave that up to God. And to focus on those things that are of the Spirit, and according to the Bible, those are things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. When someone does something that you feel is mean, that hurts you deeply, how do you respond in that spiritual manner with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness? It may mean that you have some tough love. It may mean that you confront a person, and it isn't necessarily pleasant. But it isn't angry. It isn't in any way condemning or judgmental. It's saying, hey, what you said hurt me, and I want our relationship to be healthy, to be restored once more. Okay. How do you respond? How do you even think? Because that blows our mind. That from Jesus' perspective, what we think, say, and do all have the same power. There was a man who died this past week in our community. His name's Greg. And he was one that in our current lingo, we would say had challenges. This was a person who had this delightful, kind spirit, always a warm smile for everyone. He was heavily involved in volunteering in all sorts of places in our community. And have you noticed, I certainly have it in my impression, and I hear others say it as well from time to time, that it's curious that those that we say have challenges often seem to be happier than the rest of us. And so then the question really begs, who really has the challenges here? Jesus says to come as children. Children don't worry about things of the future. They're involved with the moment. They throw themselves into whatever life is at that point in time. And I think that that's a part of it. You know, we've created this word adulting, right? It is not a positive word, right? What it always implies is that being an adult is a hard thing. There are all sorts of terrible things that I didn't see coming when I was a kid, and now a part of me wishes I could just kind of go back. But I can't because chronology has snuck up on me. And so you see the shirts, right? Today I'm not adulting, right? Okay. Why do we put so much pressure on ourselves? Why do we allow others to put so much pressure on us to speak negatively into our lives? At that point, we do have self-fulfilling prophecies. Those are what it means to say there are curses. That, in a sense, you know, the text says, how can you add to your life? Can you add an hour by worrying? And then the video, and we all know this to be true, well, worrying actually will steal from your days of life. It adds stress, and so it's much likelier that you won't live as long the more you worry. And your relationships will not be as strong the more you worry, because you're obsessing over something over here rather than focusing on the people who really are your treasures. And that's why, it's an insidious thing, really. It's the same thing when you go to perhaps a third world nation and these people have nothing in comparison to the kinds of goods that we have in the United States. And yet they seem happier. They seem more joyful oftentimes. It happens all the time these days when maybe missionaries go to Africa. U.S. missionaries have been going there for decades. And so we brought Christianity to there. And now Christianity thrives in some of those places in Central, Southern America. And so when they hear, well, a lot of people don't go to church anymore in the U.S., they go, what? And they go, maybe we'll come and help you. Well, that would be good. We need that kind of sense of focus that recognizes it's not about our stuff. It's not about all that kind of negative voicing that we allow internally and from external sources to impact our lives. So as you move into the week ahead, it is about this. Jesus says to be about the moment. And anyone who knows me at all knows that I think the Bible is just hilarious. Not in a ha-ha way always, but in a way that sneaks up on you. And so, at the end of this particular reading, Jesus' words from Matthew 6, he says, in essence, dude, you don't have enough energy to worry about tomorrow. Life is hard enough right now. It's going to require every ounce of energy you have to just be concerned about what's happening right now and to not be worrying about what may or may not happen. There is something literally right now that is happening, and that's where your focus should be. Because if you put your energy into what may or may not happen in the future, you won't have the resources to really be able to adequately address whatever the actual issue is of the day. I go, that is so awesome in practical advice from Jesus. You could say that and not even be religious, but it comes from the mouth of Jesus. And so, there are things to consider, things to internalize as you move through the week. How is it then for us to take a next step in our confidence that God provides? What is the next step, perhaps, in our lives for where our treasures and heart reside. Church and religion have this big fancy word of repent, and that just kind of starts us going in a direction where our minds turn off. But it isn't so glamorous as all that. Repent just means to change, to turn around. We have, in the regular world, the definition of insanity is, right, doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome, right? Well, the same thing happens with God. That if what you're doing in life is not resulting in blessings, well, then maybe you need to change something. You can't control anything or anyone else. So it all comes down to what you're going to do with whatever your reality looks like. And according to the Bible, that choice includes the opportunity for blessing. And how is it then that we take a next step where we move away, we let go of worrying in that obsessive manner, and find a new level of godly trust in our lives? And in a world that speaks so much negativity, that puts so much pressure on one another in what it means to succeed in the pursuit of wealth, when we vote every single time in national elections, it's always the economy stupid, right? How does that match up with then how you understand who Jesus is, who says you either follow wealth or you follow God? Are we really voting in a godly way when we say it's the economy stupid, but rather somehow, no, it's people? That's how I vote. To a time when so many people are saying, I don't want any part of church. Are there good reasons to get upset at church? Well, absolutely. Church is made of people. We're stupid. We hurt each other all the time. Okay, we deal with it. We forgive. We reunite. We move on. But we say that we have the opportunities that are not available anywhere else, to live life better, to have a life of the greatest joy and love now and through eternity. That only happens here when God's people come together. So how are you going to present that in the world this week? To those people who say, church only talks about money, or in the news has all these ways in which leaders abuse others. Those things are real. Those things have to be dealt with. But when this is the best way forward, then we come together and we're going to find that way, confident that God provides, and that when we seek first His kingdom, everything comes into the way it should be. Let's pray.